Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for a few minutes of fun. Today we're finally going to get around to doing some leaf cutting with the papers we created a couple of weeks back. I'll put a link to that video in the description so that you can see some of those papers being made. But before we kick off today, I thought it would be nice to have a look at why I find it useful to have a whole batch of autumn leaves cut ready to go at this time of year. And then I'm gonna make a few more papers, just various different colours, and then we'll get to cutting. So yes, I use a lot of autumn leaves at this time of year, all the way from sort of standard tags where they just make a wonderful dimensional element in some collaging, with whatever other focal point might be around, or ones where really the leaves themselves are the focal point, along with some words, maybe from one of my autumn, that's from the autumn edition collection of quotes by Paper Artsy, the stamp collections that I have that are words. So that's real pine cones on there, collected from woodland walks, some ready-made berries, but yeah, lots of the die-cut leaves. Cut, I think those ones are cut out of craft paper, so we're definitely going to be doing some of that today, but coloured and inked on top. They pair for me brilliantly with the paper dolls, the Tim Holtz paper dolls, when I'm heading into sort of spooky world. These two poisoning women. Strange feeling comes over you when, yes, you eat too many of the wrong kind of mushroom. There's a brilliant Czech proverb. The Czechs are very much into fungi and gathering fungi and eating them. They have a proverb that says all mushrooms are edible, some of them only once. And yeah, these two have definitely made a study of which mushrooms are edible only once. But yeah, you can see the leafy collections that form part of that. Here the leaves really are the centerpiece on some mixed media backgrounds created in a similar way to some of the mixed media backgrounds you've seen on this channel before. But then those amazing leafy die cuts from Tim Holtz are really the focal point on that little quartet. Here we've got my Acorn Edition stamps, stamped and watercoloured on a little inked background, and going from the 2D leaves into the 3D tattered leaves. So some real little bits of collaging there. Another one where I paired them with some dimensional acorns. Those aren't real acorns this time, I'm afraid. Those are pre-bought. But on the backgrounds, that was actually a pair with this tag, where those are metal skeleton leaves. But I really like those. And again, featuring quotes from the autumn edition stamp sets. So those leaves form a major part of that, again creating movement and dimension. I love them. Here's that amazing maple leaf, so I'll show it to you once we get going. This large die comes with its own embossing folder, so those kind of leafy sinews there, that texture is also beautifully captured with an embossing folder that comes with the die, so that you've got that matching thing, a little spider sitting at the centre of his cobweb there. Who else? Oh yes, so this trio, another trio of, yeah, people you might want to steer clear of. So it looks nice and innocent, autumnal leaf gathering and fungi gathering and moss gathering. But if you take a look at the little word tokens, they suggest that you might need to be a little bit careful about heading off for a walk into the woods with those three. But those were some deliciously brightly coloured leaves that I did that year. And then, of course, there's this giant one over here. So this is on a giant MDF tag, huge. I can give you the measurements if you're interested. It's nearly 8 inches by, longer than the ruler, 15 inches tall. So in metric terms, that's 40 centimeters ish by about 19 centimeters ish. So that was a floristry wreath, twiggy wreath on the center of there. And I love all the dimension on this. But then obviously it's about those autumn leaves tumbling down in the wind and some of them getting caught. But remember this, hope is never lost. Lots of crackle and stuff in the background of that. So yeah, that's a very pleasing autumnal piece of decor that gets to come out at this time of year. and brighten up the place. But you can see those leafy cuts are a chief part of, yeah, so they're tumbling down and then they gather in beautiful leafy piles at the bottom, so you can go leaf shushling through them, walking in the woods. So yeah, that's just a little idea of what's possible if you've got some autumn leaves ready to go and ready to play with. I just grab them and off we go. So today we're going to cut some so that you can see that process. People who've never met a die cutting machine, if you're familiar with this, then you won't need to watch the whole video, but do hop forwards because I'll be showing some other ways that I create the dimension and the detailing on these leaves later on. I hope you'll have lots of leafy fun. Back in a sec. You've had a little glimpse of just a few of the literally hundreds of autumn leafy projects I've made over the years. And here are the papers that we're going to cut some of this year's batch from. So these are the spray backgrounds we created just a couple of weeks ago. And these are some of the distress ink and oxide backgrounds we created on the gel plate. I'll link that. Both those videos will be in the description below if you want to go and find those. These, because they were just originally on copy paper, I've glued just onto some card so that they're a bit stiffer. Where they were on the watercolour paper, I think they're fine. Certainly the fragile book pages need to go on a bit of backing paper because, as you saw, I like to use the leaves in quite a dimensional way. And if they were on floppy book paper, that really wouldn't suit me. If you're going to be cutting them out to put in journals, then book paper, and gluing them flat, then the book paper will probably be completely fine. So that's quite a lot of papers already. You may be wondering why I want to make some more before we start cutting. And it's mostly because I want the chance to get a little bit of shimmer onto some of these papers, because one of the joys to me is, and if you visit my Instagram account called Bohemian Home, again, I'll link it in the description, where I share photos both from my garden, but also from the glorious nature around here. If you scroll down to find the autumn photos, you'll find that what I photograph again and again and again is light falling through autumn leaves or dewdrops just catching on the leaves. So that moment of light and shimmer is one of the things I love to capture, and using a little bit of shimmery product on our leafy papers can be a way to mimic that. So I've got both some Distress Mica Stain little sprays. These were seasonal, but I believe are now still available to buy. They were originally one-offs, but I think they've been released so that you can buy them again now. And I've got some of the more recent Distress Spritzes, which I was thrilled to receive from Tim Holtz to have a play with. And yeah, I've enjoyed them a lot. The difference between these two is that Distress Spritz is a clear fluid with shimmery particles, and when you're using the mica stain, the fluid itself also has some colour in it, as well as then having coordinating shimmer sitting within that fluid. So we're just going to put a few of those down, probably onto a couple of these. I'd like to zhuzh up these book page papers a little bit because they've got very subtle printing on, quite a few of them. And I also thought I might add some splatters of shimmer to some of these papers. And then I've also just got a few extra little paper offcuts that are sitting around. So there's some white card, there's some craft paper that's quite soft and floppy, so I might back that in the long run as well. And then there's a couple of these were very cheap patterned papers, I've mentioned them before, that I bought in bulk thinking I would use them as they are, but for the most part I tend to use them as backing because the patterns don't thrill me. But with a bit of shimmer added over these, I think these words will just add a nice additional texture. So I'm going to clear the decks of the papers we've already got, do just a quick bit of spritzing with some of this mica, and yeah, then we'll have lots of papers to start cutting with. Here we go. I'm going to start off with a few of these as yet untreated papers, because what I want is to give them a little base note of colour, and that can be drying while we add some shimmer to some of the others. So that's a bit of vintage photo going on to craft. You can see that soaks straight in because that's a very absorbent paper, so a completely different effect from what you get when it goes on to white paper. Let's have a little more of that. Let's do one of these as well while we're at it, to just give ourselves, so you see that the less than satisfactory newsprint is slightly disappearing under there. I'm going to add some Crackling Campfire because that's got a lovely ferocious red to it, and we might cut some maple leaves and they'll want a bit of glorious shine to them. And then on these papers I'm going to be able to get a bit of playtime by adding water to let those inks move. On the craft paper I'm pretty much going to have to be satisfied with what I've got, because I really don't think it's going to go anywhere. It's fully soaked in and it's not going to go on the move. But that's fine. I've got quite nice spray pattern, and because we're cutting this, you're not really going to perceive that spray pattern by the time it's cut into an individual leaf. Here's a little bit of rusty hinge going on, which is another one that's going to help us with sort of those moments of mottle. Get that moving around, because what's nice is to have some sort of leafy textures on those. The one I'm enjoying most so far is the one on the white background, so I'm just going to grab myself a bit more of that while I'm at it. And of course what I've got on the mat here are lovely bits of ink with which I could just choose, with a little spritz of water, to pick up like so. So again, you're getting different leafy textures with that. The ink goes onto the paper completely differently than when you do a direct spray. I actually do very little direct spraying in the general scheme of things. I prefer being able to choose how my ink is going on the paper. Sprays don't give you a lot of control, which is nice for sort of randomness. Can be really good. Actually, it is really good for a control freak like me to have to yield to what the ink is doing. So that one's got a lot of ink on the paper, so I'm going for a direct transfer of some of that over onto here. And this really is just to give us a variation of colour in our leaves, because the other glory, of course, about autumn is the massive colour variation from tree to tree, even within individual trees. I don't think I'm going to do another bit of... Oh, look, I've got it all over my flooring there. So let's pick that up as well. These are water-based inks, so it's not going to be a problem to be able to mop up later on. But this is why I would usually do spraying inside my little ink box, cardboard box. A pizza box will do. It just gives you a chance. See, that I quite like that. So compare the difference between spraying directly onto those wordy papers and just picking up some ink later on. So that's going to give us some full-on leaves and some quite subtle leaves. I might, while those inks are on the paper, also I've got this where I was trying out some new Tim Holtz stamps, beautiful little label stamps. I did a full stamping of the whole thing just onto some pumice stone backgrounds. Thought that would also be quite nice to cut. But let's give it a bit more autumn colour before we do that. Look at all of this over here on the side. Let's get that up onto this piece of paper. So really you can cut. The joy with die cutting is you don't even have to go through all of this. You can just pick some ready coloured, ready patterned paper, design papers, and just cut those straight as they come. That's making me pretty happy, that one. I may not even want to cut it up because it's doing good things for me. I might just make it into a tag background. We'll see. Once I get into die cutting mode, I find I just go on and on and on. So that's given that a bit of extra colour. I'm going to put these to one side to dry and then just show you some flicking of the mica onto some of these other papers that we've got. Well, I might as well put some mica on these while they're wet, because that will soak in a different way. So this is the mica stain, a Crooked Broomstick. Guess when that was originally released? That was a Halloween colour. So just some little flickers of this, and at the moment you won't really see the shimmer. It's only once it dries and you really get a look at it moving in the light that you get a sense of what these shimmers are really up to. There's also here jack-o'-lantern, again, clearly, so the shaking, you can hear that little ball rattling inside. That's to make sure the powders are really getting mixed into the liquid, so that when they come out, they're going to create a nice effect. So that one I will do a little bit of actual spritzing. That one I might do a little bit of actual spritzing. And speaking of spritzing, let's, as well as the mica stain sprays, get some of these distress spritzes into action. So with the powdered spray, it really is a good idea to get in the habit of just cleaning that nozzle after you've used it. You saw me use the distress stain sprays, the just ink ones. That's not going to be a problem. If you're using an oxide spray through the nozzle, that's got pigment powder within it. You really want to clean the nozzle. If you're using any of these spritzy or mica type ones, you really want to just clear the nozzle after each time you spray. Just get into that habit. So this is a brand new one, open for the first time today. Let's have a look what we've got. That's a beautiful golden shimmer. That is fossilized amber, which is, interestingly, is not a colour I have used very much, even at autumn time. But I don't know if you can catch that little, here you can see some of that shimmer just taking place. So I'm going to let those dry and add in exactly the same way, both unscrewing the nozzle, but also adding direct from the nozzle. Let's do a couple of splatters of this onto the craft, because I think that might give us... Oh no, this is the decorative paper. Where did my craft ones go? I've already put them to one side. So little splatters of gold on there, I think are going to be good. And little splatters of, in fact, here's another way to do it. I'm going to press this craft paper down on here and pick up some of that powder direct from there. And on the craft, you really can see immediately what that shimmer can get up to. Because obviously the craft is a much duller surface. We've already established that because the ink's soaked straight into it. And that gives me a really clear look at what some of that sparkle could... Oh, look at that catching the light. So that's a mixture of distress spritz and distress spray stain that's on there. If you're in the habit of unscrewing nozzles, as I do, make sure you screw them up again. That one almost fell over just then. What else have I got here? Spiced marmalade. Let's put a little bit of spiced marmalade onto some of this craft paper because I think it's going to be exciting. I'm going to pick up some of that because that's also quite wet. And again, just look at the shimmer of that. Amazing. Amazing. And for autumn leaves, just a beauty to that. So that's a bit more full-on shimmer because I'm spraying it direct. So it's going to get me really good coverage. Just having that paper towel nearby to clear the nozzle. And let's pick this up and see what we've got. Yeah. So that's the clear fluid going down, where it's just the shimmering particles that provide the colour. Fabulous. So I'm going to add some shimmer to some of these other papers. You probably don't need to see me do that because you've seen the process of it. I've pulled out just a couple of them. Those are the ones I'm going to add to. So they've got a bit more autumn leaf shimmeriness to them. And then it'll be cutting time. See you in a sec. Just while I was in the middle of that, I thought it would be worth having a really clear comparison of what I'm talking about, the difference between these two products. So just here on the craft, they're not exactly the same colour. So this was called Flickering Candle. So these mica stains were produced in specific colours that are not in the Distress range. But this is Fossilized Amber, which is part of the Distress palette. That's the Distress Spritz. This is the Distress Mica Stain. And looking at it flat on the craft, you kind of go, oh, well, I definitely want this one, not this one. The Distress Mica Stain has the colour in the fluid as well as the shimmer. But the joy of the Distress Spritz is it's got that fabulous now you see it, now you don't, where because it's a clear fluid, it's when the light catches it that shimmer comes into play. So it's a much subtler affair, where you're not going to cover up so much of your background, which the pigment in the actual fluid here will cover up background effects. What you can do is you can add a touch of shimmer to a really decorative background and you'll still have the background showing through, but just with that dusting of magical shimmer to go with it. So there's hopefully a really clear comparison for you, that if you just want to add shimmer without covering too much up, that's the Spritz is your game. And if you're looking for something that can add real colour as well as the shimmer, then you want some of that. It'd probably be a fairer comparison. I spritzed a little bit more of that than I did of this. And again, these are still wet on the craft paper. So if I remember at the end of the video, I'll come back and you can see a dried version of what these two get up to. In any case, I was just adding, in fact, let's not mop that up. Let us use that. So I can add a little bit of water to the spritz that is on the mat and maybe dip in a couple of these other papers. So here's one of the Distress Ink and watercolour ones that I just want to add a little more autumnal colour to. And I might do a couple of little bits of, I'm feeling bold today. The Crackling Campfire is definitely playing a role. So I'm just adding real fire to these quite subtle backgrounds. And because these are Distress Ink backgrounds, the colours there are also going to reactivate as soon as you make them wet. So if you've got a particularly precious inky pattern on those gel prints that you don't want to lose, this is not something to do. But that is just a sample of what you can get if you just are a little bold. And now I'm going to take, let's maybe take this tag from the spray last week and add a little bit of those that are on the mat. Again, you can shift them around with a little bit of water. It's just playtime. It really is playtime. Playtime with autumn colours. So I'm going to carry on with that, dry some more, and then I promise we're going to get to cut these into leaves. Back shortly. It's got very dark here all of a sudden. Oh, look at my inky fingers. Definitely the sign of a good time. It's very, very dark here now, so I'm working with some artificial light on. It will shift the colours and there might be annoying shadows. We'll see how we go. And you can let me know in the feedback down below whether that's too annoying for the next videos, but we'll see how we go for today. So, a very, very brief introduction to the die cutting machine for those that have no idea what I'm talking about when I talk about die cutting. If you know all of this, then by all means skip on a couple of minutes and get yourself to the cutting processes. Or even skip on a few minutes past that to see the lovely leaves at the end of everything. This is a Sizzix Big Shot. There are lots of different brands on the market. I've always used the Sizzix ones, and so that's the only one I can talk about using. There are videos all over YouTube of people using various things. It is basically a set of rollers on the inside here through which you can press card. And you can press that card either with an embossing folder, which is going to create texture, or with basically a steel rule die. So I don't know if you can see the shapes of this. This is the Tim Holtz Tattered leaves, and this is how all of Tim Holtz's dies came originally, in this big, thick format. And inside here, if I press this spongy bit carefully, I can feel the shape of the steel cutting edge that is in here, so that when I put card over this and put it in the right size sandwich to go through, it's going to cut those shapes, those leafy shapes, out of the card that I put through. These days, technology has moved on and the dies come in a much, much easier to store format. So in the space that you used to have one Bigz die, you can now have 4 whole packets of leafy Thinlits. And the detail that is now possible also to be cut is astonishing. So these, rather than being a big, thick, sponged cushion around your steel cutting edge, these are very, very slender. I mean, almost cardness. It is card thickness with, again, that cutting edge that allows you to slice through paper. The advantage of a Bigz die is that it will cut much denser, thicker materials. So you can actually cut fabric with this. You can even, with a good sharp cutting edge and a strong sandwich, cut something like thin leather fabric. Thicker card and cardboard you can cut with a Bigz die. The Thinlits really prefer to go through with paper or relatively thin card to get a good cut. And so we'll do a little bit of that with some of these papers now. I have dried a couple of the shimmery ones, so you can see some of what that's going to get me. When I finished doing the leaves, I quite enjoyed this one. This was mopping up a bit of that splatter onto one of those matte backgrounds. And I've got some of the ones that haven't had any shimmer added, but that one has got oxide ink on. Check back with that other video to see all of those. So let's do a little bit of cutting. The key with this is to get the right thickness to press down. With the Bigz dies, that thickness is kind of already done for you. With the Thinlits, you need to work with a cutting platform so that you can get the right length. I'm going to zoom out a little bit probably for some of this process, because as you can see, this just barely fits on here on the camera shot. Can you see the roller? No, if I put it a bit further upstage, for me that's upstage, further away from the audience. Yeah, so that's the roller, and that's how we're going to send them through. So I'm going to grab my cutting platform, build my first sandwich, and cut my first leaves. We might as well start with a nice straightforward Bigz die so you can see it in its simplest form, and then we'll move on to some of these Thinlits. As you can tell, I collect the leafy ones, the flower ones, the plant cutting dies. I'm a huge fan, as you know, of nature, and when these came out, they were must-haves for me. So yes, I've got a large collection of them, but I've gathered that over way more than a decade now. So I'm sorry to be adding further temptation for you all. I can't help it. These are standard tools in my crafting process, and I couldn't be without them. When I'm building a sandwich, you need some cutting plates. You can see that these are well used, and they're even starting to bend slightly, so I do have on standby a fresh pack to replace them. But I've been using these for upwards of 5 or 6 years now, I think, these ones. There are also some longer ones, so if you're cutting a larger die, which there are some, they're going to work as well. But at the moment I'm mostly going to be cutting ones that will fit between here, so we might as well work with that. So very simple, build my sandwich. There's my first plate, that's going to be my die in the middle of it, and then I just have to choose which paper I'm going to cut those tattered leaves out of, and I think it's going to be this one. You can go either way up. I mostly tend to work with my papers face down. I'm going to go as close to the edge as possible so that I can cut more than one set of leaves from here, and you'll see how that works more easily with the Thinlits as well. Then all I have to do is put the other plate on top, feed it into the die, and then start rolling. Through it goes, and hopefully as it comes out the other side, you will see that we have, as if by magic, cut ourselves 3 beautiful autumn leaves. Sometimes a little edge will not quite come out, or sometimes it's because the paper's a bit damp and is less willing to cut. But I mean, straight away you can see, and that's just the start with these. They're going to go through several more processes before I'm finished with them. I'm going to keep this bit of paper because I'm going to use some Thinlits on it in a minute, but I might, while we're here with this die, cut myself. Yeah. Oh, or maybe, yes, maybe I'll cut some of these. So this is one of the gel prints. Let's pop that face down. Lost my old cutting plate already. Where'd you go? There you are. Too many things on the desk, that's the trouble. And back through we go. So just line it up. In it goes. Run it through. You can go in either direction. Sometimes if you know you've got a really detailed die or you've got slightly thicker paper, it can be worth going through twice. With the Bigz dies, that's not such a thing, but with Thinlits, quite often it's useful. Again, I'm going to keep this because I'm going to be able to cut some smaller leaves from round the outside of it. And just wait till you see what I do with my leftover cut out pieces as well, which I'll share right at the very end of this. This is definitely going to be a few more minutes of fun, no question. So there are some more leaves to add to the pile. Let's go on to a couple of Thinlits. I'm not going to cut everything with you watching, because once you've seen the cutting happen, that's just going to go on and on and on until I'm done. So here's one of my favourites, beautiful fall foliage, that is. Again, I will list these in the description below, so if you want to head off searching for them. So for this one, I am going to need to use the stamping platform, because now we're using the Thinlits, and it gives you the instructions for what you need, how many of these flaps you need. So if I'm using an embossing folder, I don't want it quite as thick. I remove this top one and just run it through with this. But when I'm doing Thinlits, I actually want the full thickness of this to create my sandwich. So onto that goes whatever card I'm going to cut. Let's make it this shimmery one. Look at that shimmer that's happening on there. We'll do quite a small one with this. So what I quite often do with this one is the paper goes down first, and then I lay down my Thinlits face down on top of it. I don't think I want the straw. What have we got in here? You've got leaves in many sizes. You've got bits of corn and a few branches in this one as well. But I think what we'll do is we'll just go with, there's a sort of mapley leaf. There's a mapley leaf in small. There's the sort of oak leaf, which I love. It's one of my favourites. So you can see where you've already cut papers, it's quite easy to fill in the gaps and run it through and really make the most of all the inky papers you've got. That's a beautiful sort of simple leaf. Let's pop him there. There's the slightly larger version of the oak. There's a teeny tiny one. There's a kind of larger sycamore. There's the large simple leaf. And don't worry about these bits in the middle, because what I've also got is my tiny leaf punch. So if I've cut absolutely everything I can already cut, there's always going to be space to get a teeny little leaf punch out of the middle of it. That'll do for today. So let's pop the plate on the top of that. That's going to hold them firm. And I might run this one through twice just to be sure I'm getting a good cut. And back in the other direction. If you're finding that things aren't cutting, you can put a thin layer, just another sheet of card on the top here, which obviously provides more pressure in the sandwich and will force those blades through the card. So again, if you're using the Thinlits to cut slightly thicker card, that's something you might want to think about doing. Getting things out of the Thinlits is as simple as having a little poking weapon. And away we go with a shimmery little autumn leaf. There he is. The delight of this is just, it's an endless pleasure to me, because you take a large sheet of inky paper, which may not look like very much as it starts, but then you just start cutting and you end up with a magical forest floor full of wonderful leafy shapes and patterns and colours. So yeah, sometimes a little bit of patience to get these out, but so worth it. So worth it. So let's pull all of these out so that I can show you that what you also end up with, see there's one that just wants a little bit of wiggling to get him out. What you end up with is the possibility of a stencil. So if I place that down on a piece of paper, spray some sprays through it, or blend some ink through it, I can create a leafy background using my scrap papers. Just so many possibilities. I'm going to carry on cutting. I'm going to carry on cutting and poking and gathering leaves, and then I'll invite you to rejoin me for some final stages, thinking about creating dimension or even a little more detail and pattern on all of these leaves. Oh, I know which one I should show you before I do that though. We should have a little look at the layered leaf that you can create when you've got a paired embossing folder. So let's pop these back in their envelope, because I didn't want to lose any of them. But you get so many dies in this pack, a whole cluster of fall foliage in that pack, which is a treat. I might just also cut a few with this. You saw these ones on the quartet, and they're just fabulous to see come to life. But yeah, this one, so I'm back to a Bigz die, and it comes, as you can see, there's the cutting shape. I don't know if the light will catch enough of it for you to be able to see that lovely maple leaf, but it comes with its own texture embossing folder. So let's run that through so that you can see what you get. And since it's a maple leaf, let's do it in one of these bolder papers. What have we got? Is that bold enough for a maple leaf, do we think? Yes, why not? So simple sandwich for the Bigz die. Base plate, Bigz die, face down, sort of there-ish, I reckon. I want that piece of paper. Top, and let's just run that through. cuts me a beautiful maple leaf, which you could absolutely just leave like that and love it. I mean, it is beautiful already, isn't it? Seriously. But we have the option to create some additional texture. So for this one, it's an embossing folder. I don't need quite such a thick sandwich because the folder itself has a certain thickness. So that goes down on there. The leaf goes in and sits on its outline in the embossing folder. Close that up. And you can see the kind of spiny texture we're about to get. Bottom layer, top layer. Slide it in and through we go. And I might go twice so that I get a nice deep impression. Just because it's going to be easy to get it out this way, we'll go 3 times. There it is, available for me to grab. So I've now got a beautifully textured leaf, and you can create variation by going either way up. So you can have the emboss or the deboss on the coloured side. And of course, if that's not showing up enough for you, some simple inking will really draw that texture into focus. And of course, while I'm here, that's what quite a lot of my final stage of leaf making is the inking around the edges, just to create that extra look. So we'll come back to him. There are undoubtedly going to be more of those. And maybe one final cut. I said I was going to show you some of these, didn't I? So let's do that. And let's maybe fill in the gaps on a couple of these sheets of paper we've already done, so you can see how that works. Let's have you. And maybe one of the smaller ones is going to be our friend here. Yeah, let's take that one. So on this sheet, I'm going to need my extra flat back to cut my thinlits. On this sheet, I think I can fit probably one here. Yeah, that'll work. You just need to make sure it's not going to hit one of the gaps, although with a raggedy leaf edge, even that works okay. Let's fit one in here. And I think we might... Yeah, it'll just lose a little teeny bit of its stalk, and I'm probably fine with that, but it's worth it just to catch that end bit of card. And then our 2 large ones can go at this end, and I'll be able to go in between with some other dies later on. Let's pop you on there. So that's a nice full sheet of leaf cutting. Let's pop that down, just making sure they don't move too much while you do it. Line it up, pass it through, and away we go. Don't worry about all that creaking and cracking, that's just because of my bent up sandwiches. So with these ones, because they've got such intricate little holes cut into them, it is definitely worth doing 2 passes. For the most part, because they're now pressed into the paper, they're not going to move. And even sometimes with these dies, I've found that it is worth putting through an extra sheet of thin paper. So I'm just going to borrow this lovely gold one we had earlier, just to add the thinnest extra little coating. I might put it face up. If it's on the roller, I'm just thinking about shimmer going onto my roller, and then everything I run through here forevermore will come out with gold shimmer on it. Oh, there we go. And it is worth now taking a little look at my creased piece of paper. So that's the mica stain with colour and colour in the powder. That's the sheer fluid, but with that shimmering gold. They just are amazing. And for this time of year, capturing light. So let's pull these out, have a look at what we've got. So we've got a nice cut going on there. Yeah, and it doesn't want to come out because it's gone over the edge of there. That's all fine. That one is just going to want a little bit of extra nursing. That one's come straight out. And then as you can see, again, it just needs a poking implement. And the thinlits have these little tiny holes throughout. So you just poke through the hole to release the paper from the other side. And if you get down into those corners and edges, you probably find you don't need to press them all, because you're going to be able to get in underneath and just slide that out. worth releasing a few more because I can feel it's quite embedded. And that's partly because I ran it through a couple of times. If I'd taken the risk of pulling it out the first time, I might find that that was perfectly willing to come out, but I really wanted to make sure I could get the cut. So sometimes it's a bit of a balancing act. The more times you put it through, the more pressed down the paper is going to get. Oh, I can feel it lifting now. And you do get this magic moment where you just kind of go, oh, it's going to come. It's going to come. It's going to come. Sometimes they'll just peel off easy, as you saw. Sometimes they need a little more encouragement, but it's always worth it. And if any of those little skeleton bits stay in, again, your poking tool is going to be the thing to just get that out. But what a magical thing. And so you can see the gaps through on that darker paper and the possibility to bend it up for dimension, as was on all those projects at the beginning. Grand. I'm going to have a lovely cutting session. I'm going to carry on and I'll come back at the end and just show you some finishing off of these amazing leaves. And here we are after a couple of hours spent with the music on and just rolling things through the die cutting machine. I've got a wealth of beautiful autumnal leaves, some of them with patterning and writing, some of them with shimmer. I've got beautiful blues and greens in amongst my forest. So we're still sort of in transition from summer to autumn. This is when the leaves are beginning to turn. You get those incredible hits of shimmer as the light catches the leaves. Probably later in a month or so, or maybe a bit after that, I might do another spraying and cutting to get some darker grey-brown leaves so that you get that move to late autumn and into winter. So those darker leaves will come along later on. But for now, these will all go into a little tray or a little basket and sit on the desk ready for me to use them. One of the things when I use them is that they'll probably get a little bit of extra inking around the edges. So that just brings things into focus very often so that you can get that. And these ones with the lovely gaps in, it's worth giving a little inking around the edges of those as well, because it just gives you that. And then, of course, the crinkling, the joy of the crinkling. I quite often do the stems a little bit darker, but you create a leaf that has got real personality and kind of depth. And if you know it's going to be sticking up from the tag, it's worth doing a bit of inking on the underside as well. If it's really going to show and kick up, so if you make it really, really dimensional, then you could even give it a little spritz with some of these sprays to create that. So those additional little details can be really useful. This is vintage photo I'm using at the moment, but you could also go, it's not vintage photo at all, it's walnut stain. The vintage photo is waiting here, and I've got rusty hinge as well. So depending on the colour of the leaf itself, you might want to go with more of a full-on orange or something a bit brown. But again, I'm going to go in for those little bits there. And you can see sometimes little bits of those cutouts stay in, but at this stage of the inking, you'll almost certainly get rid of them. But sometimes I don't mind. I quite like the effect of the sticking up. So with this one, for instance, I might not go full on walnut stain. I might give myself a much more of an orangey leaf with a bit of rusty hinge around those edges. So that just adds that little touch of fire. And if you're really feeling full on, then Crackling Campfire would be your ink of choice, particularly if you're doing the maple leaves, for instance. They'll benefit from Crackling Campfire. If you want a sort of little veiny effect, you can run these smaller leaves through that same embossing folder that gave us the texture on here. And although it won't directly fit on that pattern, on that leaf, you'll still get that lovely sort of veining. Or you can just go as simple as fold it in half and ink with a darker ink along that middle bit, and you start to get that sense of leaf veins going through the middle. But I just love these leaves that you can get that texture from. I can't remember if I showed cutting some of these intricate lacy ones, but they're a treat as well. So lots and lots of leafy variation. So where I've got some of these blue ones or the brown ones, just adding that edging again can really give them a zing. If I'm working on a project that's rusty and blue, Then a little bit of rusty hinge around the edge of that one gives it a whole new look compared to straight blue. So I will continue to have fun with these. I'm not going to ink them all up now because there might be a project where I want a kind of light, bright, fresh look. You never know. So I might want an uninked, unedged leaf to bring a bit of life to that. But what you're also left with, of course, are all these magnificent cut-out papers. So don't neglect those, because not only are they just fun in and of themselves, look at that green one, but as I said, with a little punch, you can almost always get just a little bit more mileage. So for instance, on this green one here, where I've got a little bit more shimmer going on, I've got my tiny hole punch, and I'm almost certainly going to be able to get at least two. If you turn it over, you can see when you've got paper missing. So you can see the dark bit at the tip of the leaf. That means there's no paper under it. If I've got paper under it, I can just go clip. And the cutest little leaves. So they're great for ATCs or altered card decks or anything like that. Little inchies and twinchies. Anybody who's makes in tiny or in miniature. But they're just adorable. So as long as you've got the whole of the punched image over paper, you can get yourself another little leaf. So that's one thing I do with those leftover cutouts. Oh, they're so good. Also, sometimes I will pick some and just glue them direct to a tag, and there you've already got a background. Or if that tag has already got maybe a gel print on it or something like that, you can create extra layers. Let's pick up one of those other gel backgrounds that we had from the other day. So if I wanted to create that as a tag, I could cut it out as a tag, add that extra background over it. In fact, I want those orange bits showing. So yeah, just gluing that direct to a background gives you an amazing new background. Or of course, you can use this as a stencil. So I could spray through here, I could ink blend through here and get beautiful leaf shapes onto there. And of course, the other thing is that some of them, you could just go direct and glue them straight down as a background on a journaling page. I mean, that's already got fun for collaging over. And either you can go straight down the middle, or I could do it in one of my journals that's the right shape for this. Or if it were in a book page journal, ooh, that would be lovely. Let me just grab one of those from behind me. Here we go. Here's the one we were flipping through the other day. And there are pages in here, as you know. So if you were just to use this as a background on one of these, you've got book page showing through straight away, but just those kind of reverse leaf shapes as a background in your journal page. I think this might be a few minutes of fun quite soon. I'm going to leave that in there as a reminder to myself that that's a possibility. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing all of that leafy loveliness coming to life. It's, as I say, this time of year, it's something I do every year. Just get myself various leaves on the go, ready to play with, ready to grab for tags, for journal pages, for whatever it might be. And it gives me such joy. And as I said, I know it takes time to build up a collection of dies, but when you can create a forest floor like this, for me, they're worth every penny because they fit into my crafting world. But of course, you can also create autumn papers and cut them as anything, any dies you have. Grassy stems are another thing I do a lot of. I'm just switching between vintage photo and walnut stain and all of those things here, just because I might as well do something while I'm talking to you. So there it is, lots and lots of die cut leaves ready to play with. And as oh look, see, that one's just flipped over and shown that yes, you can have a printed one, or you can just cut it straight out of design paper and you've also got something really cool to play with. So you needn't go into all that mixed media business if you don't fancy it. Just get your patterned papers and cut yourself beautiful leaves like so. I now need to put some on the other side. I'm going to stop now because, as you can see, I could go on forever with my book pages and my little shimmering leaves. Oh, there was one last bit of paper I wanted to show you that I ended up not cutting up because I loved it so much. I wanted to show you before I cut it up. Just the golden shimmer on there with those leafy colours was a deep thrill to me. It's very grey here again today, so there is a light on, but it's a very cool bulb, so hopefully it's pretty close to daylight. Looking at the colours on the camera here, it looks to me as if we're getting a pretty accurate shot. So thank you so much, as always, for your company on this creative journey. If you've enjoyed that, do give me a thumbs up, leave any comments or questions down below. I'll try to leave as many details as possible of these dyes and the colours and sprays and the inks that I've used in the description of the video. But if I've missed anything, do shout out and I'll try to answer those questions. If you haven't subscribed, I would love to have your further company for future few minutes of fun and books, and whatever else turns up on the channel, because I'm always planning and plotting new delights for you. Thanks so much for watching and happy crafting all.